Today's cryptid stories are going to be very interesting because there is actual evidence that suggests that these creatures might actually exist. Hope you enjoy the stories. Welcome back to Gam Catches Up. Today's story is going to be about the Loveland Frogman. The last file, the one on the Flatwoods Monster, was more of an alien type encounter. This one falls more in the cryptid definition of an out-of-place animal. Before we get into today's video, I would like to thank all of you for liking, sharing, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell, and leaving your comments. You're letting me know how I'm doing and which way I should pursue with the content I'm making. Your feedback's only going to make me get better at this, and hopefully you're enjoying what I'm putting out there. So let's get into it. Our original sighting story begins back in March 1955 in the town of Loveland, Ohio. A businessman was traveling along a road that runs beside the Ohio River, and he was getting towards this bridge, and he sees, playing along the bank of the Ohio River, he sees this group of strange creatures kind of congregating together. He pulls over his car, he gets out, he looks, and to him, they look like, in his words, trolls, giant lizards, or giant frogs. He couldn't really distinguish exactly what he was seeing. So he did the responsible thing. He got back in his car. He headed to the nearest payphone. He called the police who reported it, and there was an investigation launched. And after reporting it, they had guards patrol the bridge area, and the FBI actually launched an investigation. But they didn't find any evidence or encounter anything else out of the ordinary. But on August 21st, 1955, Miss Darwin Johnson was swimming in the Ohio River near Evansville, Indiana. And she's swimming along, and all of a sudden, she feels something grab her leg while she's in the water. And she can't see what's got a hold of her leg. But she said the creature was incredibly strong, and it pulled her underwater twice before she finally was able to kick free from it. The attack left Mrs. Johnson with large scratches and bruises, but the weirdest part was the appearance of a strange green handprint on her leg where she was getting grabbed. The print couldn't be washed away, and it resembled this oddly shaped bruise, and it lingered for several days. And it's unknown what actually grabbed a hold of her leg. And while they don't know what grabbed Mrs. Johnson's leg, they think it's probably a Loveland Frogman. The attack did take place a few hundred miles away from Loveland and within a few months of that first sighting. But the speculation and thought was that the frogman actually migrated because it was starting to get colder. So they spent March in Loveland and then migrated, and nothing else was really reported from back then other than those two incidents. That was until the next sighting, which occurred around 1 a.m. on March 3rd of 1972, in around about the same area on a cold, clear night. Officer Ray Shockey was out on routine patrol, and he was en route to Loveland, and he was traveling down Riverside Road when he thought he saw a dog beside the roadway. And out of nowhere, what he thought was a dog stands up, turns its head, and looks at him. And its eyes reflect back from his headlights from his car. And now what he can see is a thing, he said, weighed about 60 pounds. It stood right around 3 or 4 feet tall, and it had leathery skin and a face like a frog or a lizard staring at him. So now Officer Shockey is staring at this thing. This thing is staring back at him. It almost looked like it was smiling, and it darts directly off the road, and he couldn't see where it went after that, but he knew it went down the embankment for the Ohio River. Shockey then immediately drove to the police station, and he came back with one of his fellow officers, Officer Mark Matthews, to go see if they could find any evidence of the creature. And the two officers spent some time back at this area just scouting, looking for any kind of clues, any kind of footprints, anything. And all they found was right where the creature had gone down into the river on the small hill of the embankment, they found scrape marks. Other than that, they didn't find any other evidence. Ironically, 2 weeks later on St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 1972, Officer Matthews was driving just outside of Loveland, and he thought he saw a dead animal in the middle of the road. So he slows down to check and see what it is, and he pulls up pretty close to it. He figures he doesn't want to leave this dead animal in the middle of the road for somebody to hit. So he opens his door. He's going to move the animal out of the road. And when he opens the door to his car, it creaks because it's a squeaky door. And what he thought was a dead animal, all of a sudden, pops up and gets into what he described as a football player's stance. It turns and looks at him, which completely throws him off and shocks him, and then starts hobbling to this guardrail right on the side of the road that's next to the Ohio River. The creature, still staring at him, puts one leg up and just lifts it right over the guardrail. And according to Matthews, the creature kind of looked like it was smirking at him or smiling at him while it's staring at him. And whether it angered him because it had that smirk, or just because he wanted to prove that the frogman was real and that he and the other officer weren't nuts, he drew his gun and fired a single shot at it. The shot missed, but the creature kept going, like it just took off and disappeared. He searched, but he couldn't find anything. Both officers, having seen this creature, and of course going back and reporting it, became the subject of huge ridicule. Everybody was making fun of them, teasing them, saying they were nuts, and this went on for a long time. And cryptozoologists actually went out after hearing the reports from these two police officers to go see if they could find any evidence, and they started interviewing and talking to the local population, to the farmers, the residents of the area. A lot of them actually had stories of groups of small frog-like humanoids. They didn't want to report it, though, because they were afraid of getting mocked and made fun of the same way these two officers had. Sightings happened all the time, and maybe it was just because of local lore and, people wanting there to be a monster, they were reporting it. But in 1985, two Loveland boys said they spotted what they described as a frog the size of a dog sitting on the shores of the Little Miami. And our story actually takes a pretty big leap from there and goes forward into August 2016. There was actually a local Cincinnati TV station reported that two teenage boys were walking out in the woods playing Pokemon Go. They were right between Loveland, Madeira Road, and Lake Isabella, and they had claimed to see a giant frog that was staring at them, and its eyes were shining at them, and it was right near this lake, and it stood up, and it walked on its hind legs. That sighting was actually revealed to be a hoax. It was actually a local student from Archbishop Muller High School in a homemade frog costume who knew these two kids were going to be out there and wanted to scare them. It was this prank which got the news talking about the frogmen again, and Officer Matthews actually called into a radio show and revised his entire story. He said that basically when he came across the thing in the road and he had stepped out of his car, that the thing made a run for it. He pulled his gun immediately and shot it between the eyes. And just to make sure that it was dead, he walked up and he shot it 2 more times. He then took the body and dragged it back and put it into his car, drove it back and showed it to Officer Shockey. And according to Matthews, it was a large iguana about 3 or 3.5 feet long and didn't have a tail. A direct quote from Matthews was, "It either got loose or was released when it grew too large." Officer Matthews presented the body to Officer Shockey, and Shockey confirmed it was what he had seen out there in the dark that day. And apparently Matthews had told this to this author of this book about local folklore and legends, and the author omitted that part of the story. But there's certain problems with his revision of the story. Problem number one was Officer Shockey's sister actually drew a sketch for them of the creature, of what they described to her. And both men verified that is what they saw out there. And I'm actually displaying that picture now. The other problem, and it's actually the problem I have with it, is if you thought you saw this crazy creature frog man, and you shoot this iguana that's 3 to 3.5 feet, and you have the body for it, you show it to the other cop, why didn't you show it to everybody else? How come you didn't just present your proof then and there? That would have, made everybody, they might have still made fun of them, but they would have been resolved. Something just doesn't make sense. That just makes logical sense to me, that if you have evidence of, hey, I thought I saw this and it was really this, and here's your proof, that would kind of clear your name. So I find a huge problem with that part of the revision. Any which way you look at it, the Loveland Frogman has taken on its own folklore, right up to the point that in May 2014, the legend of the Loveland Frog was made into a musical titled Hot Damn, It's the Loveland Frog. It had decent reviews. Now, maybe what Officer Matthews said was correct, and it was an oversized iguana that was running around. But I found in my diggings other proof that it might just be a giant toad or a giant frog. I mean, there's also the case of the Connecticut frog folk, which is actually this known clan of people that live in Connecticut, that they only come out, they only see them every now and again in town, here and there. There's a ton of witnesses to them, but it's actually this inbred clan of people, and they all live in this decrepit compound. They usually only come out at night. They'll venture out into town here and there, but basically they're described as having eyeballs on the sides of their heads, crusty lips, white cheeks, like big white cheeks, sunken noses, and their nostrils look just like thin slits, which make them look amphibian. They have large heads and small bodies, and hair that tends to only be in patches, so it's some kind of genetic flaw or just inbreeding, or maybe a combination of both that make these people appear this way. But that could possibly be they went on a vacation to Ohio. Now, I highly doubt that, but there are people that do look that way. I tend to lean towards this other information that I found, and it actually involves folk stories from China and South America, as well as other spots in the world, but those are my two main focal points. So in August 1987, there was a team of 9 scientists from Peking University, which is now Beijing University. They were led by 58-year-old biologist Chen Mok-chun, and they traveled to very large, very deep mountain pools, one of which is named Baofeng Lake, in Wunan within central China's Hubei province, in order to film the area and its wildlife. While setting up their television cameras, however, they saw something start emerging from the nearby lake. These 3 huge creatures just popped up, and they start moving towards the edge of the lake nearest to them, and everybody was just stunned because they looked like giant toads with grayish white skin. They had mouths that were said to be 6 feet across and eyes bigger than rice bowls. And according to Chen Mok-chun, they sat there, the creature sat there and watched them for a short time. Then all of a sudden, one of them opened its mouth and extended this ginormous long tongue, and it wrapped around one of the camera tripods. And while it was doing this, the 2 other creatures let loose this blood-curdling scream scream, and all three creatures then submerged under the water. Seeing this shocked the scientists so bad that one of them apparently physically dropped to his knees and then got immediately sick from fear. The whole incident would have been written off and dismissed as a hoax, except for these 9 scientists were not only highly credible, but major names in Chinese biological research from all over the country's leading universities. It also helped that there were reports of these creatures being sighted in the same area by local fishermen dating as far back as 1962. Meanwhile, in South America, there's claims by, and I'm going to butcher the name, but I'm going to try and say it anyway, the Mapuche people relating to a supposedly immense species of toad, indigenous to various lakes, lagoons, and irrigation canals in southern Chile and southwestern Argentina. They call these large frogs/toads, they call them Arumco, which means big water frog, and it is said to measure up to 3 feet in length. One such creature dwelling in a lake was rumored to have devoured a horse that was attempting to wade across the lake, but whether the story is true or not, nobody's quite sure. It's just native folklore. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's one of these creatures that was somewhere else in the world. Somebody caught it when it was a baby and brought it home with them, and it got free and got out there, bred with the natural wildlife, and somehow reproduced. Who knows? I'm not sure. I'll leave that for you guys to decide. Discuss it in the comments. Have a conversation. Maybe you can come up with something better than I did for what these things could possibly be. Hey, maybe it was just an iguana. If you think that, put that in the comments too. But anyway, that's today's story, and I hope you liked it. And if you did, please do me a favor, hit the like button, share the video with a friend that might enjoy this type of story, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to keep going down this rabbit hole, and hit the notification bell. It'll let you know when I post new content. Thank you again for watching. I'm Gam, and I'll see you next time.